Well, here it is. A Munificent class star frigate specifically designed with the 2024 Invisible Hand in mind. Instructions and parts list down in the description. This Munificent is within a stud of being perfectly scale with the Invisible Hand. Now, at such a specific scale with little to no wiggle room, some compromises did have to be made, and I will address those later, though I'm sure that some of you eagle-eyed viewers might be able to spot them now. But first, let me show you guys the positives of this thing, because I think that the positives far outweigh any negative design choices that had to be made. The first and most obvious thing, I guess, would be that it looks really nice next to the official Invisible Hand. Knowing that this Munificent was going to pair with the Invisible Hand, I wanted to make sure to give a lot of the same stylistic choices that the designers up in Billund did. Some of those design choices include the same bridge design as well as some similar greebles. It's not a one-to-one, obviously, since they're not a one-to-one in universe, but they're reminiscent of each other for sure. And so are the translucent yellow pieces that dot both of these models. And, of course, the stand for the Munificent is very heavily inspired by the stand for the Invisible Hand, though it is much smaller because you wouldn't want it to look more important than Grievous's flagship. But, you know, even if you don't have Grievous's flagship, I think that this thing still looks pretty dang good on its own. I spent a lot of time making sure that all the greebling down there and all the details looked at least as good as they could in this scale. And I think that I did a pretty good job, especially for somebody that doesn't have that much experience designing MOCs for other people. Of course, at a glance, it looks like a Munificent, but even when you start getting in closer, it still looks like a Munificent should. You know, it could have looked considerably better with some more sticker detail on some of those larger pieces, but I don't pretend to be a graphic designer, so I think that a couple of stickers from the 2020 AAT make it work pretty well. And I didn't skimp out on any of the detail on the bottom of this ship either. Perhaps what I'm most proud of, though, is the durability of this thing. After designing it in studio and everything, I was worried that it wouldn't be as strong as it looked on the computer, but I am happy to say that it is actually a lot stronger than it looked on the computer. Aside from a couple of obvious pieces that you don't want to pick this thing up from, you can really hold it anywhere and it'll be okay. I guess that the better part of 2 decades of building official LEGO Star Wars sets has really attuned my mind to know how these things ought to be put together for the maximum strength. As far as handling goes, the only part that you might get annoyed by could be the stand, because if you just pull it off, then this black piece often comes with it, so you have to twist it to take it off. But, you know, the twisting motion is pretty simple, pretty easy, and it bakes into your muscle memory pretty quickly, so I think that it is perfectly acceptable. And honestly, I feel like that's just a good piece of advice for you guys. If you ever have a circular tile stuck anywhere, try twisting it off. But yeah, I think that that's everything for handling. Now I'll go ahead and talk about some of those design compromises. The first one that I'm sure most of you have probably noticed is the ribbing on the bottom. I'm sure that a lot of you are aware the Munificent has some angled ribbing on the bottom of it, as you can see in this stellar brick vault model here. And the ribbing on the bottom of mine is very clearly pretty straight. I would have liked to have been able to use some of these pieces on the underside and just angle them out ever so slightly. However, not only was this design much stronger, but it was also much more flush than the other design would have been. Ultimately, I decided that it was probably a little bit better to have those panels on the bottom locked in a little tighter than it would have been to have a slight angle to these ribs. The next compromise, and arguably probably the worst one that I had to do, would be the placement of the engines. Ideally, the engines should sit a little bit lower and have a little bit less paneling around them. But doing that would have meant attaching the paneling from back here, and it just would have been way too flimsy and too easy to knock off, and I did not want that on this model. So while it is a little bit less accurate, and ignore my finger covering up the camera there, I think that most people probably won't notice, and that it still looks pretty good from the backside. Now I'm gonna put the footage in reverse real quick so that it's back up on the stand, but yeah, overall, I don't think that it's too bad. I don't know if it's a deal breaker for you. I hope it isn't. I hope that you still think that it looks good and worth the effort to build. But yeah, maybe sometime in the future I'll revisit this and completely rework the entire structure of the backside, the entire way that it's built, to try and address this issue. The second to last thing that I want to talk about is the fact that Munificents do have like these two little antenna wing type of things here. And I tried like a dozen different ways to try to get this to work, to have them on there somewhere, but it just ultimately did not end up being a feasible thing to do. And finally, the last pretty major compromise that I just had to accept needed to be a part of this model is the thickness of the paneling. If you look at pretty much any source material for this ship, you'll notice that the panels are pretty thick and also pretty rounded. They just have a very specific shape. So LEGO does make some pieces that fit this specific shape pretty dang well, as long as you have the freedom to choose what scale you're working at. Since I had a very specific length that I had to hit, there was no way to make this look good. Anytime I was at the right length, it just looked too chubby and not pointy enough. And anytime I got the shape to look good, it was way too big. So ultimately, I had to go with a more slim and sleeker design, which I think was the right move, because it was really important to me to keep that scale with the invisible hand. And considering that such a large portion of my subscriber base comes from the Surprisingly Scale series, I'm guessing that it was probably important to a lot of you guys too. Anyways, let's go ahead and just talk about the most important thing here, and that is how much the parts will run ya. The instructions themselves are only $1.80 in American dollars, and aside from some of these random stores that just throw a $200 price tag at you, if you know how to use some of the optimization features on Bricklink, then you'll be able to get all the parts for $30 or less. And then if you wanted to go the extra mile and just get a couple of CIS logo stickers for these, then there are plenty of places online where you can find either real stickers or replica stickers for like $6. All of that, of course, was in USD. Anyways, that is a full in-depth look at this thing, and I think that the only way you can get a better view of it is by actually building it for yourself. So, thank you for watching this. If you're interested at all, please go and get the instructions and the pieces. All the links are in the description. It would really help out the channel, and if any of you guys do build this, then take some pictures, put them on Rebrickable or even in a community post here on YouTube. I would be over the moon to see that somebody actually went out and did this design. And if you want to see a Gazanti in scale with the Imperial Light Cruiser that I built, then check out this stuff on the end screen now, also on Rebrickable.